We are going to call this February 9th special meeting of the Issaquah City Council to order at 6:30 p.m. And there is a remote aspect to our meeting, and our council president, Barb DeMichelle, is attending virtually tonight. And we are first going to start with public comments. And we're going to ask you, if you have public comment, please raise your hand. If you want to raise your hand virtually, you can do that as well. Not seeing any public comment, we will now close public comments, and you can always submit comments to us via email, and that is citycouncil@issaquah.gov. And we will now go into the main portion of today's meeting, which is the special council meeting on transportation. And we're going to go to Andrea Lehner.
Good evening. Just one moment while I pull up the presentation.
Councilmember Joe has found a song we can play during times like this. We have to find out if the rights to the song can be purchased for 112 Issaquah beanie.
I will see the musician tomorrow. I'll negotiate on behalf of the city for you.
Looks like we have liftoff.
We do. All right. The system has caught up with us. It now allows me to share the information. Let's get back to the top here. All right. Sorry for that delay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Andrea Lehner, Deputy City Administrator, and we're here to talk about various topics related to transportation and what the administration's priorities are regarding transportation. So we have a few presentations kind of back-to-back planned for you this evening. The first to kick us off, Mayor Mullet will be discussing his transportation priorities and the administration's transportation priorities and approach for 2026 and beyond, including capital projects, TIP update, and which is the Transportation Improvement Program update, and the Transportation Benefit District funds. Also, city priorities in regards to light rail and our upcoming light rail station. Then we'll have Bennett Ashbaugh, our streets manager, discuss pavement management, and then I'll be back to talk about MetroFlex and microtransit options. And we have a bunch of questions for council and direction needed tonight, all related to each of those projects, including feedback from you this evening on the administration's capital priorities and how they will inform the upcoming TIP update. As a reminder, that Transportation Improvement Program is going to come back to council in June because it needs to be adopted by July 1st per state law. Then we have a question related to light rail and our approach to light rail. How does council want to be kept informed and engaged on light rail work with Sound Transit? More information coming in the mayor's presentation. And pavement management techniques. Should the city continue to prioritize cost effectiveness in the treatments we use on our roads, or does council want to set a higher aesthetic standard for the roads and have that be the guiding priority? And then finally, MetroFlex or microtransit goals. This is a return from last fall when council said we need to come back and talk about what's the definition of success for our microtransit program and for MetroFlex. And we can also discuss a few other options at that time and get your feedback on those. And so, as we begin here, Mayor Mullet.
Okay, here we go. My official tech skill challenge. Ooh, look at that. That's like a low enough bar. I can jump over it in the IT world. I appreciate that. So I think we're going to start off with, and this comes back from the council retreat that we just had last month, and kind of highlighting that in the 27-28 biennium budget from the administration, you will see a large priority placed on maintaining the infrastructure that we currently have. And the payment management program, which you're going to hear about from Bennett tonight, is kind of the core of that, of how you choose to make sure you have capital budget resources so that program can continue and be effective and you won't slip behind. So here's the chart that shows historic funding from the city of Issaquah when it comes to pavement management or street overlay, whatever you want to call it. But you can see that there were several years where we were under $1 million in terms of money that was put into the program. We did have one point where it dipped down. We then did use ARPA dollars to have it go back up. The last couple of years, it's kind of been around that $1.4 to $1.5 million mark. And the plan from the current administration is to actually fund it back at the line where we're saying we need to be funding this so we're not falling behind in terms of maintaining our infrastructure, which would be in that $2.7 million range, which would actually be record investments for the city of Issaquah in terms of street overlay. And you will see a much more in-depth presentation later on from Bennett in terms of how you can smartly spend those dollars and try to get as much life out of your streets as possible before you actually have to do the full street overlay, and that'll be the council discussion. So that's the main priority. The second thing we want to be really clear with our community about is we are going to finish the trail that comes in from the South Lake Sammamish communities into town. These communities were annexed into Issaquah 20 years ago now, and so this has been a priority for these communities since annexation. Obviously, the cost of this project is not getting any cheaper. It also happens to currently overlap with all the culvert work happening via WashDOT right now, which basically means we can't, the soonest we can start work on this project is the summer of 2028. But we also want to be very clear with these communities that we will start work on this trail in the summer of 2028, and we're making this public promise that it will happen, it will be done, and it will finally be complete. And we think it has a variety of benefits. We don't know yet how we're going to score in terms of grant funding on this proposal, but if it has to be, we're committed to pay the entire thing, but it also, we're going to be as aggressive as we can in the next couple of years of trying to secure grants for this project as we move forward. And if people have questions, I encourage folks to ask them as we go. You do not need to wait till the end. I find it much more helpful to have it as you go through each slide. Yes, Councilmember Joe.
Quick question. So you mentioned the councilmanic bonds repaid by Transportation Benefit District revenues. Do you have a sense of what's the total, like what's the maximum amount of bonds we could get in terms of capital funding?
Yes, and it is roughly $30 million from bonding the TBD money. And we also have $4 to $5 million in traffic impact fee funds that we also will have access to. But finishing the portion of the trail that we currently haven't paid for through design funding is basically half of that. It's roughly $19 million. For us to finish this trail coming in from the South Lake Sammamish communities will eat up literally over half of those dollars. But you will be left with a portion of, I think the whole proposal you're hearing tonight is that the money that is left over from that, we want to try to figure out the smartest way to invest those dollars in our community. Take advantage of the fact that we can't start that project till 2028, so how do we make the best use of projects coming up in 2027 that we can invest in? Councilmember Nicholas?
Yeah, I'd like to just double click and question the premise that we can't start until 2028. I know that's the commonly stated belief, and I understand it's around the culvert. I understand why we can't complete this. I've asked a question a few meetings back of how long is this culvert area. It looked on the map like it's a few hundred feet, something like that. max. This is a long road that's significantly longer than that culvert section alone. Why couldn't we do everything but that? It will obviously not be completed, the culvert, but I would think the final date could be pushed sooner if we were to start the parts that we could do sooner. And in any situation, there will be a less than optimal diversion around that culvert during construction. So it's no worse off than it would be not having that complete, and the rest of it will be better sooner.
So I'm going to give you a former life state construction chair example, but then I'm going to phone a friend to have Emily Moon come up to address this question. But I think the challenge I found funding state capital projects was people want to bid, like they mobilize and get their workforce there, and if they have to leave and come back, it tends to be not very efficient from a cost perspective. So you normally wait to start the projects when once everyone's on site, they remain on site until the project is done. You don't end up having leg periods where people move on to a different project and then have to come back. But that's my guess. But Emily, do you want to come on up to address that question?
Good evening, Emily Moon, Public Works Director. I think there are a variety of reasons why we have this sequence the way that it is. First, WashDOT has a lot of disruptive work. It's not just in the vicinity of the culvert. So first phase includes utility relocation. That runs the whole length of the road, not just at where the culvert is being installed. It's not just the culvert. They're building a whole bridge. So I would argue our project is going to be underway earlier. We're building the bridge first. WashDOT is building that for us. So there's that. There's, as the mayor had said, mobilization, demobilization, having multiple contractors with multiple different project owners and oversight all in the same area at the same time would mean it would be very complex to make sure we have the level of accountability and oversight if those contractors are getting in each other's way, undoing each other's work, making it more difficult to get the project done. I think ultimately it may take just as long or longer if you have those sorts of conflicts. So that's just some of the reasons why.
And I think, Councilmember Nichols, we all share your kind of sense of urgency on this project. We know this community's waited a long time. I think our hope tonight is to make a very public statement to the residents in South Lake Sammamish that it is a priority. We are going to do it. We're committing to doing it, even if we don't have any success in securing outside grants to help fund the project. This is going to be paid for entirely by City of Issaquah dollars if that's what it takes to get it done. But it's a priority, and it will be done. And yes, it would be nice if we could do it quicker. And if we find ways to speed it up, I think we'll pursue those options. But I think right now, that's roughly the plan. Councilmember Marsh.
Thank you. This has been going on for a while, and those residents really need the ability to have that safe transportation. Have we considered, or is there an option to utilize something in a temporary way to provide a protected bike and walk lane that would allow a little bit less exposure to vehicles on that very tight roadway? I would suggest something like a plastic bollard.
Yeah. I think we're open to those conversations. And so I will admit at this point, I don't have any cost estimates of what those would look like. But if there are things we need to do on a temporary basis to help make it easier to travel that route for the next 2 or 3 years while the project's waiting to start, and even after it starts, we still have a construction window, obviously. So I think those are all being considered, but standing here right now, I can't give you any good cost estimates of what those would be. Okay. So, Councilmember Nichols.
This is a quick follow-up. For the bridge that WashDOT is building, does that have the same, I forget what this is called exactly, but the number of lanes and widths for pedestrian and bike access as the rest of the planned
Yes,
area will?
the answer, it will accommodate that. So there won't be a narrowing there. Okay, the next update. Now, these are a list of projects that are almost entirely, except for a couple exceptions, design-funded projects. These are not going to be in construction in 2026. So Front and Sunset, and when we talk about Front and Sunset, it's the Sunset portion. We're trying to make it easier to have better flow, whether you're coming from the east or the west on Sunset approaching that intersection. Black Nugget Wall is something Councilmember Martz and I were dealing with when I was on the council 15 years ago in terms of how we stabilize. That is just the existing retaining wall is staying. We're building a second wall outside of that wall, and that's how we're going to provide the structural integrity. But once again, this is design work. Northwest Gilman Bridge, once again, these are design work projects where grants are coming in. The ITS is an actual project that we do want to get done in 2026. And the main focus of our ITS investment in terms of intelligent transportation system, and this is trying to line up your signals the best you can, is kind of focusing from Front and Sunset all the way down towards Gilman and then 4th Avenue. And that's where the focus is going to be. The other, so the rest of these, it's a substantial amount of money. A large majority of this money is coming from outside resources, not directly from City of Issaquah dollars, but we are spending the design money, so those projects will be ready to go into construction next year in 2027. So this brings us, I think, to, Councilmember, Deputy President.
I have a question about that list, and you're going to tell me that you've already told this to us. I'm just maybe having a senior moment, but remind me, the pedestrian walkway along 900, that's our responsibility, right? Where does that fit in all this?
Well, it is now done. We did it. Oh. So it opened last Thursday. I think Councilmember Nichols rode his bike through there. We made it an unceremonial ribbon cutting. So I think the moral of that story is a squeaky wheel does get the grease, and our staff did a good job of being the squeaky wheel with WashDOT, and they got it done last week.
Well, that happened a lot faster than Hillside Park, I just have to say, but all right, thank you.
Okay, so this I think gets into Councilmember Chang's kind of question of what do we have in terms of excess revenue after we finish this trail coming in from the South Lake Sammamish communities. And there's one project on this list that we just saw, the Front and Sunset, where it was already part of our, transportation improvement plan. We have design all ready to go on that. So that is one project we are committing to doing next year. Once the design is done, we would like to get that project wrapped up and done. And you're talking a project that's roughly $2.4 million if you were to put a rough estimate on the total value, design and construction. The other projects, I'm going to be honest with you right now, we don't have enough information to say which ones make the most sense. And so I think this is where we're looking for council feedback tonight, because this is just a sample list of potential project ideas. One's an extra left turn lane when you get off exit 15 as you're heading west towards Seattle. Another one is a roundabout where 2nd Avenue hits Front Street just south of the high school. We also talked about extending the right turn lane into Talus further down towards where Issaquah Mountain Nursery begins. So you could kind of double the length of that right turn lane to make it easier for Talus residents to exit evening, afternoon traffic congestion. But this is just a sample list, and at this point in time today, we don't have enough modeling or enough cost estimates to even be able to weigh in on which one of these would make the most sense. And this list is not, this is where we're really looking for ideas. And so ideas from people on the council. I've actually made an open ask to Issaquah staff members who spend a lot of time driving around our city, like in the Public Works Department. We're looking for suggestions of place where we can make smart investments to provide congestion relief. Oh, Councilmember Walsh.
Yeah, I guess I was going to ask, we have a whole list of TIP projects that do not have funding associated to them. So how do you propose balancing out the idea of adding new projects compared to things that we've had on the list that we haven't been able to fund, things like the ITS project, which would provide smart traffic signals, which a lot of people have asked for, or the Squawk Mountain Multimodal Project, which would provide bike and walk pathways to a neighborhood that's been in the area without any for a while. So I guess I'm trying to understand, you're coming in here new, we have this whole list of projects. How do those ideas compare?
I think I don't think there's one silver bullet that solves the traffic challenges facing our community. So ITS, we'll see in a further slide, is one of the things we do plan to fund immediately with these dollars. And I think it's actually a legitimate use of transportation bonding dollars to actually complete, specifically like we mentioned earlier, the front and Sunset down to Gilman over to 4th is kind of the priority corridor. We want to make sure the ITS investments are focused on making that part of the city move more efficiently. In terms of multimodal, like those projects are all on the list. Like just because they're not listed up here as potential example ones, like they're all things we're willing to look at as potential things moving forward. And how you balance, I think the challenge with the current list of projects is we have a lot of projects that are extremely expensive. And as we talked about earlier, we're really talking about investing $10 to $15 million as efficiently as we can between now and the summer of 2028, because we know the trail project's going to eat a majority of our capacity. And we have a lot of projects on that list that exceed that by a factor of 5, if not 6 or 7. And so this is our challenge, is those projects will still be on the list, but we're trying to figure out what can we do in the meantime to provide congestion relief rather than just doing nothing, because we have no money falling out of the sky to pay for a lot of those projects right now. But everything you come up with, please, we want to hear about it. And those are the ideas we're looking for in the months ahead. In terms of the other safety examples, I think having the crosswalk by the Village Theater and the one on Black Nugget as you kind of go from the Fred Meyer complex over, towards the 24-hour fitness complex, traffic calming around schools, sidewalk extensions. These are all things that we think, as we try to identify good projects, we could get done in 2027, but this is where we want to work with the council to figure out what list makes the most sense. Councilmember Chang.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the transportation improvement plan, I do think there's a lot of items on there that are very, very large. And there is one in there called strategic small capital projects. So I think identifying which projects might fall into that bucket is probably good. I think the Squawk Mountain sidewalk, in my view, would be a big priority, similar, it's somewhat similar to the Northwest Sammamish road improvements projects, where it's something we've talked about for a long time. We approved the last year we approved the study, but with no funding source. So it would be ideal if, and the cost is not that much. It's like $1 or $2 million maybe. So it definitely seems like a priority. One other thing I would flag that is not in our transportation improvement project is, so basically once you get past the Highlands, like on Issaquah, once you cross Issaquah Fall City Road and go north from there, there's some neighborhoods where there's like no safe route to get from there to the Highlands. So, when we were doorbelling there in the fall, the parents there were like, my kid rides their bike. It's very scary. Would be great if you could do a sidewalk there. There's one section of it where there's like new development, so they put in the sidewalk, but there's no sidewalk before or after that. So it would be a good opportunity to kind of, fill in those gaps.
But those are the perfect examples of why we're doing this outreach now, is we want to be able to look at the list of projects, try to do our best cost estimates of what they are, and then you try to make smart investments from there. And yes, the projects that come in that $1 to $2 million price range are very appealing. When you only have $10 or $15 million to spend, we're trying to avoid doing one $12 million project that maybe just helps one part of Issaquah, but doesn't actually help the entire community. We're really trying to figure out how do we strategically invest dollars throughout the Issaquah community in a way where no matter what part of town you live in, you feel like some improvements were made. We'll go to Councilmember Nichols and then Deputy Council President Martz.
On the same theme as Councilmember Chang brought up, I think all of the projects up there are, at least on this list, which I understand is not intended to be comprehensive, but just to make the point, they're all focused on car improvements. There's lots of places we need to improve our safety and throughput for motor vehicles. To your goal of spending some of this lower dollars more efficiently, though, there's likely some pedestrian and other and cycle mobility options out there that might be smaller projects that could have a significant impact. And I would encourage us to think through those carefully and look at them and see if those could be.
I know we have two members of our council who are have a lot of knowledge about the various bike choke points in our city. So that's what we want to hear the feedback. Like, we are looking for really specific concrete examples of projects like you're talking about, Councilmember Nichols, so we can try to get cost estimates of those projects. And that is the entire point of our exercise here tonight, is to say we want we're trying to label for the council the rough amount of money we have to try to invest, and we're trying to figure out what's the best way we can get the most out of those investments, and it means all modes of transportation. So yes, I think the very bottom example here on this list you can see is not anything to do with car movement, but yes, the ones in the middle, we just use car examples. Deputy President Martz?
Thank you. At the risk of going back to cars, how do we get our arms around the potential traffic improvements on, I mean, my gold standard would be that like you'd have a before and after from Torsten on like every little thing, right? Obviously, we're not going to run 50 major traffic studies. Do we have an ability to understand the potential traffic ramifications of some of these small to mid-size improvements?
Yes, is the answer. So that's what, we have to determine what that list of projects we want to run through that is. But yes, we feel like if we know what we're looking at, we can, for one, you can just do some actual, where you lay down the little cords people run over to kind of give you data counts.
Sure.
But we also can go to traffic modeling. So I think the plan is to figure out the list and then try to figure out what the models say, which ones would be the most helpful, and then figure out how much they cost.
So my new favorite verb is t-shirting. So do we have the ability to t-shirt these and say small, medium, large impact, or maybe small, slightly less small, medium?
We will, by the time we've looked at them, I think we'll have a very good sense. I think what we can't say right now is of projects that are in that like $2 to $6 million price range, we can't tell you which one we think provides the most improvements in terms of flow through our city. So that's sort of what we have to figure out.
But the ones that we suspect might, we're going to put some more computational
Yes.
horsepower behind it. Because traffic is really weirdly nonlinear, right? So it could turn out that there's like one crazy little intersection where if you
Yes.
make an improvement there at all.
Some would say the intersection could be Front and Sunset.
Thanks.
Okay. So this just talks about, Council President Michelle. Sorry. Go ahead. Oh, you got bigger on my screen just now. Oh, I think you're on mute, though.
Now can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Well, I just wanted to follow up on Councilmember Nichols' comments. King County just released their draft traffic safety action plan, and there's a great emphasis in that plan on pedestrian safety. Washington State is experiencing the most pedestrian traffic deaths in its history in the last few years. And so from that standpoint, looking at that crosswalk at the Village Theater, I think would be an excellent focus for us because it's really dark there. We have crowds coming out of that theater almost every night during the season, and I've seen people kind of cruise across that street during the daytime because it's so frustrating to walk all the way down to the next light to cross. So I think that's a project that we might want to think about, but I like the idea of looking at more than just car safety. We need to be looking at pedestrian safety as well. Thanks.
Yes, excellent point. And I think specifically we have this one on the list. And so like right now, I'll be honest with the council, we're trying to figure out like, do the lights, can they be solar powered as opposed to wired? We're trying to figure out how to drive down the cost of doing these projects. And so in this case, I think we hope to come back to you with cost numbers that are lower than what our traditional projects would cost because we're trying to be creative. And I think with things that involve lights, if you can use solar to make them operate, it obviously will substantially reduce installation costs. And I think for the Village Theater, that's our big question we're trying to answer right now. Okay, so the next slide really talks about the importance of securing grants from outside sources. And I'll go back to my previous career in the capital budget. I thought from a state perspective, our goal was to draw down federal dollars into our state of Washington. And I think from a city perspective, we're in the same camp, except we have more things to choose from. So we can choose from county dollars, we can choose from state dollars, we can also choose from federal dollars. And I think our focus throughout this entire process is we want to attract outside dollars into our community to help us meet the challenges when it comes to transportation and mobility. And we're going to be aggressive on that. And I think, we had a conversation, I think, on one of these projects, the council meeting last week, and we've done a deep dive to try to understand with the Newport project of how federal money plays into that project. And I think this is going to be the stuff we're really trying to get our head around as we go forward for the next couple of years. I think once you commit that you're going to put your money on the table, I think you do have a big advantage in going after a lot of these grants. And so our hope is that we commit to putting our money on the table, and we think it will give us an edge as we go into these grant cycles in the next 1 or 2 years ahead, is our hope. Okay, if there's any other questions on that, we are going to shift into the Issaquah Light Rail update. Okay, we are making the shift. Obviously, I think we're all familiar that originally we were on the S23 map at 2041. When they hit their first bump in the road, we got bumped back towards 2044. And there are big decisions, I repeat that, big decisions being made on light rail in Puget Sound. They're all going to happen in the next 1 to 4 months. So we expect by June 30th, if you want to be on the ST3 map, you're going to have to do a lot of work between now and the end of June to make sure if you're on the map that you stay on the map. And so this is our focus, I think, as the administration, is to make our case of why we deserve to stay on the map and how we want to be a good partner with Sound Transit of actually getting this line built. I think before we go into this specific details, I think the council did see the letter that was sent by the CEO of Costco today to the Sound Transit. Similar letters are coming from, the president of Bellevue College and, elected leaders along with other, important businesses in this region. And we're having a meeting with Squamish Tribe on Friday to discuss their support. I think we have rough commitments from the mayors of both Maple Valley, Snoqualmie, North Bend, and Carnation that they would consider, signing on in support of the importance of this line. I think our argument to Sound Transit is if you look at the light rail map, the cheapest line to build on that map that is currently not built is the Issaquah to Bellevue connection. And so it's already the cheapest, and I think we're making an argument, as we met with Julie Meredith, the head at WashDOT, that you could run a line basically using almost exclusively the WashDOT right-of-way. And so that would involve a station that you'd have to figure out where it ends, but if you're going to end on WashDOT right-of-way, it's very likely in the middle of I-90 with some sort of pedestrian overpass, and then you would have a stop at Eastgate, and then you could connect to Bellevue at what is the most cost-efficient connection point, which we think would be South Bellevue, most likely. But I think in meeting with elected leaders in Bellevue, they seem to be open-minded to figuring out the most cost-effective way to build this line. And there currently is a station at Richards Road, and we're trying to figure out if that station is necessary or if you could reduce costs by not having the Richards Road station. And so I think the message we're making to the Sound Transit board members right now is we're looking at this in a way to try to be a good financial partner of how you could do this line at a better price point than what's currently on their Excel spreadsheet. And we don't know, we're trying to be different than some of the communities right now that are going through, who are currently further ahead of us on the list, but are actually doing the opposite. They're demanding more stations, they're demanding alignments that involve a lot more right-of-way acquisition. And we're trying to do the opposite on both fronts. But it's not going to be easy. And I think the goal is the meeting on February 24th, Save Issaquah's Light Rail, I think is a chance to have important leaders in the transit space come and talk about why this is a time-sensitive topic. And that takes a little explaining for a line that's currently scheduled to come to our community in 2044. So I think we're trying to make that argument. And I want to be clear, our goal in this whole process is to say this line is one you can build under budget and ahead of schedule, and we're trying to figure out if there's any way we can actually move ahead of schedule. And I don't think that means, you're going to have light rail here in 2 years, but once you start and commit to a light rail line, you can be open in 10 years. And so I think our goal is, it'd be nice if we could open in the late 2030s as opposed to going into the 2040s. And this is our challenge in the next couple of years is to really make our case about what we're willing to do as a community in this project, and the advantages it would have for Sound Transit to actually have a line get done ahead of schedule and under budget. Are there questions on Sound Transit? Yes, I do like this, say Issaquah's light rail. If anybody else has a catchier phrase, feel free to share it with us. But right now, that one seems to be the one that's standing out. And I think as we talk about the specific ideas, it's around right-of-way, minimizing that, minimizing parking garages right here in the Issaquah Valley floor, saying we already have 2 Sound Transit garages that are already built off SR 900 up in the Highlands. And we're really focused on how you can connect to Bellevue at the most efficient price point. So those are the big 3, I think, that we're bringing to the table, that other communities are doing the opposite when it comes to light rail right now. And I think this communication one is we're trying to share as we submit comments to Sound Transit. We're trying to share them with the council from these letters of community support. But I think we are tonight open to feedback in terms of the level of kind of updates you want, and it could be there's more updates between now and June, just because this is when everything's really time sensitive. But for folks who know people that are passionate about transit, like, now is the time to let your friends know that this is the time to weigh in. And I plan to personally attend the Sound Transit Board meeting on February 24th to share my comments, but other folks can start weighing in, because the time is now. There's going to be a retreat for Sound Transit in March, where I think some of the big decisions will start to get discussed. And so this is why there is a sense of urgency of making sure we make the case for this community around why these light rail investments are really important. Oh, Council President DiMichele.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Mullet. I will let you know I am thrilled with this approach. So I think there's been, in my opinion, there's been a little bit of mixed messaging coming from Issaquah. And I think that making a forceful statement in that we are here to support this Leak Light Rail Station is really, really important right now. So I really appreciate your approach to this. And I would personally be quite willing to participate in advocacy with the Sound Transit Board, or to round up interested people in the community to testify on behalf of our Leak Light Rail Station. I think the stronger our message, the more important it is right now. So thank you very much for your strong advocacy on this. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for saying that. I think this goes back to the council retreat, where we're saying we're all in a canoe together. If we're all willing to row in the same direction, I think we'll go a lot faster and be a lot more effective. And I think to Council President DiMichele's point, the mixed messages, you have heard people talk about bus rapid transit. And I will say my experience, my 5 years living in London, my 5 years working in New York City, is you see investments around light rail investments in the community around those stations in a completely different way than you do with bus rapid transit. Completely different way. They have the ability to positively transform communities, whereas bus rapid transit, because those lines can move on a whim, you don't see the kind of follow-up investment to create the really vibrant, walkable village communities that we think would work right here, both north and south of I-90. Okay, we are now, Councilmember Adair.
Yeah, I did want to echo the same thing. I really do appreciate your aggressive approach and really moving quickly on this. I guess my question really goes to the idea of, you mentioned this is the time to act, this is the time to do stuff, and what exactly specifically help can we and or the community do to help this? Is that you want crowds of people at these meetings?
Yes.
What's the concrete action that we can take place now until then to get things moving?
I think every Sound Transit Board meeting that happens this year, if we have people from our community showing up to talk about the importance of this line, that will help. And so the next one is February 24th. There's then a retreat in March. And Andrea, you want to come up?
I'm sorry, the board meeting is on February 26th. We
Oh,
can
it's
send out,
26th.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, okay.
We can send out that information to City Council. We'll also be publishing a web page tomorrow that's going to have a lot more specific actions. We'd love to share that with City Council so that you can share it within your networks. And of course, we're having our own community meeting on this topic on February 24th from 5:30 to 6:30 in this very room. And so we're going to encourage as many people to come as possible to learn more about what they can do and learn more about the current status of light rail. So we hope that you can help us getting people to that meeting too. Thank you.
Councilmember Jang?
One other thing I would add, so Sound Transit also has a system expansion committee, which,
Chaired by Angela Burney.
yeah, so they meet, their next meeting is this Thursday at 1:30, so if anyone, that, I think system expansion committee is really where they're gonna be making the decisions on which light rail lines to prioritize or not. So in terms of having people show up to meetings, I think that one would be a good one, in addition to the regular full board meeting.
I completely agree. We did invite Mayor Burney to our community meeting on the 24th, but that is the night of a Redmond City Council meeting, so she is not able to attend. And, okay, now you're gonna get Bennett's infectious energy for street overlay. Deputy President Martins.
Yeah, I want to plus one your comment about the transformative effect of transit. You know, Minneapolis had a really hard time getting going with light rail. And it actually took, bizarrely enough, a former professional wrestler to be governor to just say, we're going to do it.
Is that Jesse Ventura's baby?
That's right. And it has had a profound impact on Minneapolis in a way that's seen as very positive in Minneapolis. And so, you know, it is easy to talk about those things when talking to the Sound Transit Board and to do all that. There's also the element of, you know, we live in an era, 5 years ago, I talked about a lot about how some states were big net contributors to the federal government and didn't necessarily get a lot back. That conversation and that metric has become really pronounced in the last few years. It's true regionally as well, right? And nobody wants a rich community saying boo hoo hoo, you know, we don't get all the services, but you know, we ask a lot of the voters, right? And we like to think that there is some equity around contributions that are made into regional funds coming back into the communities, right? We supported ST3, right? This community, there were a lot of people that said the East Side wouldn't support ST3, but we did it. We took a leap of faith, we supported it. I pay huge tabs every year on my cars. I'm sure a lot of other folks do too. You know, again, we can't say boo-hoo because, you know, we don't have some of the needs that some of the other communities have, but we do have needs. And to get so little back for so long, if it were to turn out to not, that ST3 wouldn't fund this, it would be a real loss regionally, and I think it would make it a lot harder to make regional arguments when other large ticket items come along. If this huge investment we made 15 years ago or 12 years ago, whatever it was, doesn't pan out at all. Thanks.
I 100% agree. I think we are advocating on behalf of Issaquah taxpayers to get what they were promised when we asked them to vote for this back in 2016. And I was one of the people that asked them to vote for it, so it's very personal to me. Okay, Bennett, it's all yours.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, Council and Mayor Mullet. My name is Bennett Ashbaugh. I'm the Streets Manager for Public Works, and I'm also responsible for the Pavement Management Program, TR 030. So tonight I'm going to talk about pavement. Really exciting, really fun stuff. There's a lot of nuances to it, as simple as it looks out there. So we're going to go through that. I also provided a memo, pretty extensive memo on this to get through the technical jargon and whatnot for this presentation. So, all right. So the direction needed tonight, should the city continue to prioritize cost effectiveness, or does council want to set a higher aesthetic standard? Today I got a question from Councilmember Adair, And just to reiterate what we're looking for, this is, when we talk about the higher aesthetic standard, we're talking about the appearance and uniformity of the surface after a maintenance treatment. So ultimately, that is what the question surrounds, right? And this decision can really influence, the different types of treatment, budgets, the whole 9 yards in terms to long-term outcomes when trying to maximize the pavement life, the useful pavement life. So to get started, we're going to go over the standard deterioration curve of asphalt roadways. This is really important and integral to this discussion. When you're looking at this graph, the black line represents the standard deterioration curve of asphalt roadway without maintenance performed. So you can see it starts at 100. In theory, in the first 4 or 5 years, it drops pretty drastically down to that 85. At 85, it plateaus in that good condition. You might get a small crack here, a small crack there, in that 85 range. And then once you get through that plateau, you get to a point where it's starting to go down that curve, and you can see it goes down that curve faster and faster and faster. That's when you get a pothole that turns into a larger patch, that turns into a crack, that turns into something else. So our goal with PMP is to take a citywide systematic approach and looking at the whole system and decide what treatments apply to the what road at the right time. So there are some roads, as we know, as you guys know, driving around, that you see and you're, man, this is bad condition. Some of those roads have reached a point where they have to get a higher cost, I'm calling it reactive treatment, which is removing the top surface, coming back and placing a brand new top surface. The goal in a perfect world is going to be that we perform maintenance treatments, lower cost maintenance treatments in the good or the top of the fair range. And that will, again, bring our PCI number, pavement condition index numbers, a grade that we provide the roadways, which I'll get into in a little bit. And it brings it back up and it starts that deterioration curve again. So that's the goal of PMP, the pavement management program. How do we extend the life of these roadways to the maximum extent possible? So our level of service goal for the city is to maintain an average PCI of pavement condition index PCI of 73 to 80 in a range. Performance measures, we're aiming to treat 8.1 lane miles annually using preventative and reactive methods. And then we also get an updated PCI through a third-party analysis every 3 years. That's the industry standard. And then additionally, we've invested in our in-house crews and some equipment, and we're using our in-house crews to do spot repairs to slow that deterioration. When you get that first pothole, we're going to be there to do a patch, so we don't have it keep going. Now, I talked about the pavement condition index. As you can see on this slide here, the PCI rating is on the left side. Here, so it goes from 100 down to 0. And it basically acts like a grade in school, right? So 100 is excellent, 15 points below that, good, fair, poor, very poor, failed. In that 100 to 85, the excellent to good range, that's when we want to be doing the preventative maintenance treatments, which is going to be crack seal, surface seals, and patching. These preventative treatment maintenance techniques cost between $1 and $8 per square yard. They can extend the life of the pavement between 3 and 10 years. Then you get down into the fair and poor category. This is where you're looking more at reactive maintenance. The fair category, you'll see in later slides, I highlight on both the preventative and reactive because there's other variables that come into play there. They might have just 2 really bad spots on that street segment that we can patch and make good. Or it's already gone past that point and we need to do a full reactive treatment. The one thing I want to highlight here on this fair to poor category is the cost difference as well as what it triggers. So if we do a surface removal and overlay, removing the top 2 or 3 inches of asphalt and replacing it, we're looking at $35 to $45 a square yard. And that difference there is between residential and arterial, and collectors are kind of in the middle. But not included in that price is it triggers regulatory ADA upgrades. So we have to, federally mandated, we have to repair and replace all pedestrian access ramps. Those can range between about 7,000 to 12,000, depending on, you know, are there utilities in the ramp? Are we relocating wire? Are we doing this? Or is it a standard residential ramp that has nothing in there? So it does trigger that as well. Council in 2022, we created the TR 054, which is the concrete maintenance program. And that program actually works with PMP, and they replace the ramps on those roadways that we need to do that work on. So that these regulatory upgrades are not coming out of the PMP, the TR 030 fund, but the...
1 second, Bennett.
Yeah.
Deputy President Moritz has a question.
Yeah,
So, you know I'm a math nerd, right?
I
So,
love it.
I'm struggling with the $1 to $8 per square yard because it's such a huge difference.
Yeah.
And you get some actual overlap because of those ranges and the ranges on the added life. You actually get some overlap between the preventative maintenance and the reactive maintenance in the dollars per yard per year because of that huge spread. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes.
That seems like the 1 to 8 seems like a huge spread.
Yes, it is. And I'm not exactly sure where my slide is, but in a few slides I'll have pictures of each treatment, and I can show you, like crack seal is $1. We're just chasing cracks around, so it averages about $1 a square yard. A surface seal can get up to $8. And so I'm combining them all as preventative treatments, but that is a large spread. But crack seal, for example, only lasts 3 years before you have to do it again. A surface seal goes up to 8 to 10 years. So that's why that spread is so wide there.
So, but no, that helps. So the $1 is closer to the 3 years, and the $8 is closer to the 10 years.
Yeah.
Because if if you were selling reactive maintenance technologies, right, you would say, oh, $8 per square yard, and it only lasts you 3 years, right?
Yeah.
And then the reactive maintenance looks better. But what you're telling me is that they're proportional. The cost and the life has some proportionality. Okay. That makes it maybe less
I
overlap
appreciate your
between the two.
question, though, because that does help.
Thank you.
Yes. So we've gone through excellent to good. We've gone through fair to poor, very poor to failed. In the council memo that was put out, there were some pictures to kind of show the difference between those treatments. But very poor to fail is where you're talking reconstruction. Reconstruction is taking it down all the way to base, sub-base, repairing any structural issues, the whole 9 yards there. And that's why you have the 85 plus per square yard in that category, because you're not quite sure what you're going to get into when you open up a road that's failed and where the failures are in the base, what type of fabric you might need to use. It's kind of all happens once you start opening the road up. But if we get into that point, those roadways, if we do a reconstruct, there's also federal mandated stormwater upgrades that have to occur if you disturb so much square footage of a road. And typically when you're doing a reconstruction, you're going to be meeting that threshold. So then you have to upgrade all the storm and do all the ADA. So our philosophy is to try to stay out of that, out of the sub-base as much as we can, utilizing all these different types of treatments. And you can see here the net gain on added life. It's not huge with a reconstruct because you're still talking about that top surface that's exposed to all the elements and traffic. Any questions? Yeah, I'm not sure on the question.
I mean, I know it's on this
Yeah.
slide, but I was curious, like, do we have roads that are approaching that bottom level?
We have sections of roadways that are. One of the worst roadways right now is Gilman. There's a lot of areas with concrete panels underneath the roads from old highways that they just caked asphalt on top of. And as those panels have failed underneath the road, it brings the asphalt down, breaks it up. So we have some plans on how we're going to hopefully repair some of those, but additionally, some of those projects are already identified, such as Newport, Maple to Sunset is a big project that's been talked about. believe, everywhere. So that's one of them. So a lot of the failed sections are actually in areas that have been identified for other projects as well.
And I will say the Gilman fix did not fall in the $2 to $4 billion price range, unfortunately. And I think the other thing that came up with that is, obviously, the light rail discussion is, so what happened? We're kind of waiting to get some clarity of what's going to happen there, because I think we want to put a bike lane on Gilman. We want to do the overlay, but we also want to do it when we know kind of what the full vision is going to look like, which right now, and I don't think there's any way we'll know this year exactly what's happening. Councilmember Chang, did you have a question?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, one of the roads that I go on that to me seems to be one of the worst is the Newport Maple to Sunset. And so is basically the concept that we're not really going to do the full roadway repair until we can do everything in that one project all at once.
It's a great segue into kind of talking about how we make our plan for PMP. So we've known Newport is a roadway that we needed to treat since we did our first scan to create our benchmark in 2019. Probably before that, before I was here. However, as we go through these projects, we coordinate with everybody, all the different utilities, all the different capital projects. Our goal is to build a roadway, to maintain a roadway, and to have nobody touch it for at least a few years and not throw away that investment, basically, by having to mill it out. So in the case of Newport, it's actually on our work plan this year. We're probably going to be doing a lane width patch over that bad section off the side of the road, and that's actually right on the edge of a concrete panel that's failing. So we'll do small patches and try to hold the road together as long as we can, but there are times where we've had to pave the road knowing that there's upcoming projects coming down the pipeline. It's just a balance of how can we provide that safe, reliable surface for everyone and maximize our dollars. But we utilize our in-house crews a lot more for those types of projects.
Okay, and one more question. I'm curious if we, I feel like with budgeting for the PMP, we typically do it in the biennial budgets, but do we have a sense of over the next 10 years, what's the ideal amount of maintenance that we should be doing?
We do.
And if we don't, if we fall behind, what's that going to mean for?
We do.
Okay, great.
The pavement condition scan is occurring right now. We don't have the final numbers yet. They still haven't scanned the road, so we're trying to find a good weather window to scan the road. And then part of the summary that's going to be provided at the end of that project, it has all of the different scenarios of do nothing, don't fund PMP, and this is how your road will deteriorate as a network, to fund at this level, and we provide them with those numbers of, hey, can you give us one where we're minimal funding and we're only doing surface seals? Can you give us some when we're fully funded, which was on that graph that Mayor Mullet showed and that we'll show again. So yes, we will have all those scenarios. I didn't present those now because those are 2022 numbers, and we've had a lot going on in the city in terms of new roads and construction. So.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. Can I make a request that, given we have some newer members of council, I think when we get those new numbers, it would be a really great opportunity to take us on a little bit of a tour.
Love it.
Just to be able to, we haven't done a good bus tour in a little while, and all y'all need to really pack into that van a little bit with us. So I think that would be a great way to really demonstrate the difference in pavement quality.
Absolutely.
Bennett drove me around town. He's a much better driver than Penelope, so I can say he's my 15-year-old. But he was very safe. I felt very secure.
I only missed
with
my
Bennett
turn
the wheel.
3 times because I was talking. But otherwise, yeah, I'd be happy to.
Council President DiMichele.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, thanks. Bennett, could you talk about what is entailed by higher aesthetic standards?
Yeah, so, well, if you wouldn't mind, if I can get to those treatments, I think it'd be a lot easier to explain while I have the pictures pulled up. So in about 2 or 3 slides, I'll address that. Is that all right?
Okay. Yep, that works.
Thank you. So this is the overall citywide PCI map. And then what I did here is I took out all the failed, very poor, and poor. Again, as I talked about, I left the yellow in there because those are hit or miss whether or not they're reactive or preventative maintenance. But overall, this is 83% of our network is in this category that could potentially receive the preventative maintenance treatments. And that's a great number to have. And those preventative maintenance treatments are here. So here we go with what we were talking about. So crack seal, $1 a square yard. We're following the cracks around. We're basically sealing them like you'd seal the cracks on your house to prevent water from getting in. Potholes, I think we all understand that piece. Spot-specific patching. Yes, this can get expensive if you're doing it on a square yard basis, but the impact is small. So we're potentially, this is a lane width patch in this picture here. That's our crews performing that lane width patch. That's really helping out the overall ride and safety and reliability of the roadway. But it can be cheap at the 25. It can be more expensive if you're including all traffic control and all of those other aspects that come into arterial type patching. And then on the bottom you have the surface seal. So these pictures are of slurry sealed streets. The one on the right, I believe, I forgot which street that is. It's in the woods. And this is the product. So slurry seal on average costs about $4.50 a square yard, or 12% the price of an overlay. You can see here, Councilmember DiMichele, the surface on the slurry seal on the right side doesn't have that compacted, smooth, like super smooth finish, and that's what we're talking about with the aesthetic piece of it. So similar with the crack seal, you have these lines all over the street. That's not very aesthetically pleasing, some might say. You have a road and you have 4 patches on the road segment. That's a different color and a different, different material. Some might say that's not aesthetically pleasing. Is it the right treatment for those roadways in terms of PMP and maintaining your system? Yes, 100%. So that's kind of where that question is coming from. So in this case, you have the slurry sealed, $4.50 a square yard. Its life expectancy is around 5 to 8 years. And then you come back and you do a crack seal treatment or something like that. So that's the slurry seal side of things.
Bennett's side hustle is going to create a dating app for street overlay, and everyone's going to choose the one they like the best.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. I know we approved slurry seal several years ago as a way to really stretch out our pavement management program dollars and allow us to pave or retreat more miles of roadway. Some of those neighborhoods have had a pretty negative reaction to that immediately after. I know some of that was due to poor management of the particular contractor that did it. But have we looked at different ways to message that the treatment gets better and smoother over time? And can you kind of talk through what your approach is to slurry seal in the future, how you would do it differently?
Yeah. So you are correct. In 2021, it was actually a cape seal, which is a different surface seal treatment. I just didn't highlight it in this. But yes, the cape seal happened. It was supposed to dry quickly. It did not dry. And that's enough to make many people upset. That there was a mechanical equipment error on all of that. But we have talked as a group, as a pavement management team, and with Emily Moon, and we are coming up with a much more robust outreach when we do surface seals again. We are not slated currently to do them in 2026 because we have some overlays we need to get done. That's been on the plan for a while. But coming into 2027, should this conversation support that treatment, we're definitely going to have a lot more outreach. We're going to have videos and messages of what it should look like month one or week one, month 2, and all of that. So we're definitely going to have much more robust public outreach, and maybe even meeting with the neighborhood specifically, like, hey, I'll be out there at 3:30 on this day if you want to talk about what's coming, stuff like that.
Councilmember Nichols, you have a question?
Thank you. So there, I see a lot of different options. They have, you're pointing out some of the aesthetic differences, but also cost and life expectancy differences. How much of the life expectancy for these is related to the amount of vehicle traffic that hits these repairs effectively, and the types of vehicles that are driving on them?
Very good question. So when it comes to surface seals, right now in the industry, those are not typically applied to arterial streets. Arterial streets have a ton of weight. Sometimes they're truck routes. They have a ton of turning movements. They have a ton of stop and go, all the things that make it really hard on the top surface of arterials. So most arterials are getting overlays pretty much at this moment in the industry. That technology is not quite there yet. When it comes to residentials, the biggest contributor is trash trucks, and the damage that they do just being on the far, as they go around the street to pick them up, their tires are right on that interface between the concrete and the asphalt, and that's your weak point in the system anyway. I don't think we're getting away from waste management, so what we do is we try to build that up a little bit better. So ultimately, all of it has an impact. All of those data points and how much vehicle traffic, ADTs is happening on a daily basis is all contributing factors to these treatments' success. Yeah.
Okay, so as a follow-up to that, have we looked at, for any of those roads, any of those road classes all the way up, whether reducing vehicle miles traveled by either pedestrianizing or partially pedestrianizing, blocking off neighborhood access, et cetera, to only residents, whether any of those things could add lifetime to these in a way that might creatively decrease the cost of these improvements and help us bend that curve down towards a place where we want it?
I have personally not really gone down that route, that road, in terms of road diets and whatnot, and how that might impact the longevity of the pavement. But there are other factors that we can't really help, and one of the biggest ones is the sun. The sun oxidizes that material on the surface, and it eventually is going to crack and become brittle, and that oil leaves the top surface, and that's one of the biggest failures is the sun, and then snow and ice. So we've had a very mild winter, but as soon as any water gets in a crack and it freezes that night, it's popping that crack wider and bigger. And so some of those things we can control, some of those things we wouldn't be able to control.
Yeah, so last follow-up on that. So yeah, I understand that none of these roads will last forever, and eventually entropy will win the day. It would be interesting to know, though, if there are any, even if they're partial pedestrianizing efforts, temporary, et cetera, are there any places where we could, in effect, save money by converting some of our streets into those in some areas, and perhaps making some win-wins there?
It's definitely something we can look into and get back to you on.
Councilmember Adair, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just having trouble quantifying what the aesthetically pleasing option is in terms of, it's like, does that mean like we won't do crack seals that are $1 anymore? We'll only do these slurry seals, or like dollar-wise, what does the aesthetically pleasing option look like?
The aesthetically pleasing option is the full overlay. The removal of the surface, the overlay, that $35 to $45, maybe $50 treatment. Because that's what, that provides the smoothest surface, it's just the most uniform, smooth surface that you can provide. But that is a higher dollar treatment. And the other side of that is, we're not going to perform that on a good road. That doesn't make financial sense. So that PCI value that we have is going to be dropping drastically. Like, we're not going to do it until it gets to that fair to poor category. So our overall network PCI is we're going to have potholes, we're going to have patches. We're never going to get away from patches and potholes. Some communities don't do crack seal, and surface seals are starting to become more prevalent. Renton's doing them, Kirkland's doing them, Bellevue piloted them. Bellevue's going to put together a crack seal contract this year. So the lower cost maintenance treatments are definitely starting to get more of a rise in this area in general.
Councilmember Chang?
Sorry I didn't ask this question earlier, but very basic question. How many miles of roads are there in the city of Issaquah?
Great question. So we have 285 lane miles is how I calculate that. So lane mile is 12 feet wide by 5280 or 7,040 square yards. So that's how I use them.
Okay, so we have 280 lane miles and we're treating about 8 miles per year. So just mathing that, that means that the average lane mile is getting treated once in every 35 years.
You stole my thunder, yes. That is
And
what we're doing.
the length of most of these, I mean, especially with these preventative maintenance things, you know, if the lifetime's like 3 to 10 years, it seems like probably over time we're probably falling more and more behind. Would that be accurate, or?
It would be accurate if we are going to pursue only overlays. If we pursue only overlays to maintain the same PCI that we're in now, we have to reduce that down to about a 20-year maintenance cycle to keep up, which then increases our budget, you know, $4 to $5 million a year may be needed going forward instead of where we're at now on the trajectory we're on. So with the use of maintenance treatments, you know, PMP is not the only one that's doing overlays throughout the city, right? We have these major utility projects, private utilities, PSE, they have requirements in our standards that we've made pretty tight that they are required to repair the road and or do a full width overlay. So the PMP goal on that 8.1 lane miles is the 35-year maintenance cycle. And you can see in further slides that when we use the surface treatments, we're gaining that 11, 10 and a half. We're gaining a lot more treated lane miles than we are when we're doing just overlays.
That makes sense. Do you have a sense of how many miles of pavement are treated through other programs that are not PMP?
Well, we have a lot of good opportunities like the NHS grants that we've been able to utilize in 23. And I think we got approved for 2 more. I think it was in 24 that are upcoming. So I don't have a perfect, clear sense, and I'm not sure I should throw a number out that I'm not quite sure about, but we can get it. Yeah, it really is up and down. It's totally dependent on what projects are coming in and what we're funding ourselves to do on the utility and water treatment, water line replacements and whatnot.
On the NHS grants or the National Highway Safety Grant, like PSRC, and that'll, like the last one was, I think, on East Lake Sammamish. Like the main roads is where we score really well on those grant projects. But
yeah, very true.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. Cool. All right, so in this slide, I took away the good and excellent. You can see the network, the red's highlighted a little bit more, so you can see those. And this accounts for only 17% of our network. So that's still a great number because many of these are arterials. And I mentioned we can't do some of the surface seal type treatment, but we can do the crack seal and the patching. Those are very important for to keep the arterial roads in the shape that they're in. And these are the reactive maintenance techniques that we've talked about already. So on the left, you see the surface removal and overlay. On the right is the reconstruction, and honestly, I don't have a picture of doing that in Issaquah because I'm really trying to avoid it as much as I can. So, but this shows, the top surface course is what you see every day, and that's about 6 to 8 inches thick. And we'd have to go and replace that, the base course, and the sub-base, depending on the failures and whatnot. And it triggers those regulatory ADA upgrades. So what's our PCI at the moment? I have upgraded some of the roadways that have been paved since 2022 and some of the treatments that's been done. And my estimate currently is the weighted average is at 76, based on those numbers. Some of the roadways, I went through all the math, all the data. It's hard to even describe. Just stuck there looking at all the data. But right now we're at a 76, in my opinion, and we'll have new numbers. This shows the lane miles treated annually, like we were talking about. Basically, in 2019, we had a presentation here, and the council chose at that point to, this is serious, let's invest. We were on a 75-year maintenance cycle at that point, which that's gravel by the end of that, right? If we're lucky. So with that, we put in, we started planning, did a great job, and then the COVID-19 came, and we wanted to reserve those funds for potential outcomes of what that would be. So we held off that year on PMP, and then making it through that, we've really heavily invested in 2021 for a record investment, and we were able to treat 8.6 lane miles of surface seals as well during that year, and that brings us at 10.9, well above our 8.1 lane mile average, or goal. In 2022, we made the concrete maintenance program that drastically helped by, we weren't diluting the pavement treatments with needed concrete repairs. So effectively, we gained more funding by creating that program for the PMP. Again, in 2025, last year, we treated another 8.2 lane miles with the surface seal, again, getting above that 8.1 average. So every year that we've employed these different strategies, we have gotten above our level of service average. In 2026, right now, we're estimating about 6.8 lane miles to be paved based on our draft project list that you guys got. It's still a draft, but that's where we're projected right now. And you can see in 27 and 28, we're not sure because we're still coordinating on projects. We're still coordinating heavily with different utilities and different projects to make sure we're not paving something that they're going to tear up right after. Back to Mayor Mullet's slide he shared earlier. This is the actual funding sources that we've had, and shows the investment that we have had and where we're at and where we're aiming to be in the next few years. It pretty much correlates with the other lane miles paved.
Councilmember Walsh? Oh, Councilmember Nichols.
Sorry.
Look at the honesty from our council. Nobody's jumping the queue.
I'm not used to the.
We're like a
the
British
questions.
council.
I think she'll get to go too. So,
Yeah.
okay. I have a bunch of questions about this graph. I want to start by saying linear projections kind of scare me a little bit. You've got a bunch of nonlinear things at play here. We have just kind of thinking through how I think you're describing how the system works. When things are kept in relatively good repair, it's easier to keep them in good repair longer for less money, put simply. And then once you start, if you fall off a cliff, eventually you talk about additional ADA requirements that have to be built in there, et cetera, going back to different, more expensive remediations, things you said you would like to avoid, for example. Yeah. How does this graph put us on a path towards the goals that you set out at the beginning of this presentation, which were to keep, I think it was either median or median PCI of 73 to 80. You've got this green line here. Is that the green line that keeps us there on that? And if so, for how long? It's only going out 2 years. And I could imagine, since we have all these nonlinear effects in here, what happens if we start dipping below some critical threshold? Can you model that in some way that might be informative for us to help us spend money now more wisely? Or is this a path that you think is going to be fine and that we will be able to, at this rate and continuing at approximately this rate, keep our pavement PCI at a level that's acceptable without having these kind of doom loop effects?
Yeah, so let me try to summarize and capture everything you asked right there. So you're asking basically this green line, there's a lot of different variables that could come into play to maintain the pavement in general, right? And this is a linear line that we're going off of. So in 2019, the industry standard at that time was about at $1 a square yard for a healthy pavement management program. So that was our benchmark when we started really investing into the pavement management program. The line represents a 4% annual inflation rate because cost of oil is going up and down, and we're tied to that as well. So that's what the green line represents, is that 4% inflation rate. What we can show with this graph is, if you look back at the other one, it's not necessarily linear. It doesn't match exactly the budgets in terms of, we were able to do a lot of lane miles and pave a lot of lane miles with lower budgets as well. So the pavement management program will be pretty flexible if we have this array of maintenance options available to help hold it together. If we were to not, have a less than adequate funding for 5-10 years, we've been really having a hard conversation. But in this scenario, over the last 3 years, we've dipped below that line because we've needed to allocate that money to other priorities within the city. We've still managed to perform these surface seals, get above our level of service goal for one of the years. We're projecting that we can get the funding back up to a level where we can do more different treatments and different surface seals and all of that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, we can be flexible. We can do a ton of crack sealing and maintain those roads to a certain point. We can do a ton of surface seals and keep the good roads good, and then wait until we have the funding to do the surface overlay, hopefully before it gets to a reconstruct phase. So it's all a balance, but every year is a balance in trying to be flexible and adapt to the needs of the city and what funding allocation we can have for PMP. It's another reason why I don't really project 27 and 28's lane mile that I'm going to be able to achieve.
But I think, Councilmember, the main theme, I think, of administration tonight is, yes, we're looking at roughly doubling the amount of money we've been spending in this program compared to the previous 2 years. And I think part of that goes back to the very first slide of length of time is, 15 or 25 years. You think about our community, like 25 years ago, you had 2 very large hillside communities developed in Tallis and the Highlands. And so I think we're trying to get in front of what we think is us approaching that curve by us having a commitment to larger investments in this space. Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. Can you go back to the lane miles, the one previous? So I think the goal of 8.1, if we had been doing that for a long time, makes sense. But how do we address, if I add all of those negatives up for the number of lane miles that we didn't treat in previous years, that's like 30, 35 lane miles that are we behind at that point? And if so, how do we work on not just maintaining the 8.1 lane miles per year, but catching up?
Great question. I guess what I would say is, in 2019, when we did that scan, we got our benchmark number of our pavement condition index, and that's a network-wide number. So regardless of what happened in the past before that, we used that as administration and everybody as our benchmark moving forward. And since that time, without talking about 2020, we're averaging about 8.8 lane miles a year getting treated. So we are meeting that goal that we set out, and the new PCI numbers that come in that report will show what levels of investment will do to our overall pavement health network-wide. And then it's our job to take that and go down, we go down into every single road segment, and we can even go into 100-foot sections with PCIs. So that's kind of how we have started and developed our program moving forward from 2019. Yes, sir.
Deputy President Martz.
Can I ask maybe a related question? It looks like we took a big leap in efficiency between 2019 and 2021. If you look at the expenditures, in 2019, we were spending almost $1 million and only covered 1.8 miles. And then just 2 years later, we did go up to $2.3 million, but holy moly, we got almost 11 miles.
Yeah,
So can we do more of that?
yes, we sure can. And that is our surface seal program is when that kicked in.
Okay, so that's specifically the surface seal.
Yeah, so we, oops. So in 2021, we did that at 8.6 lane miles of surface seal. You know, additionally, some of these years, if we're low, we could be paving a really wide street, like Highlands Drive, where we have really wide street with big quantities that give us a lower price. But we're not, you know, we're trying to get to that level. It's just a balance of trying to do the right thing in the right year. Okay. All right, so in conclusion, basically, our goal, maintain 73 to 80 PCI, we're at a 76. Perform annual maintenance treatments on 8.1 lane miles, we're at 8.8 over the last 5 years, important fact. And overall, we're able to do this by utilizing both preventative and reactive treatments. Now, I want to make clear in the memo, I mentioned that you can't solve all the roads and maintain all the roads with only one type of treatment, right? So we can do 2, maybe 3 preventative treatments, and then we have the high dollar overlay. And then we go back, and then we can go back to those maintenance treatments, pending any base and structural issues. So our goal is 75% preventative, 25% reactive maintenance on a road. That's our ultimate goal, and right now, I think we're on our way to achieving that. So that's where we're at right now.
Well, thank you very much, Bennett. I think you guys have been asking the questions. Oh, Councilmember Walsh.
Yeah, I asked a lot of questions. Now I want to give my opinion.
That's all right.
You know, I'm a huge fan of fully funding our pavement management program. I think coming in 2019 and seeing the difference that we could do when you came in and said, hey, there's all these other techniques that we could do, I really want to applaud that. Whenever I am running around the city, you know, my husband calls me a city nerd in the fact that I look at those crack seals and I'm like, yay, that means we are being cost effective with taxpayer dollars, and it means we are actively doing preventative maintenance. And so I see that as a benefit. I also really like the use of creative and testing different methods for slurry seals and other things that we can use for our neighborhood streets. So I definitely applaud that, and I think the more that we can do to stretch our dollars, the better. That being said, I think we need to look at what some other cities have done as far as messaging to let residents know that, you know, this pavement style will improve over time. And make sure that we have our street cleaners through there pretty effectively during that period. I think we can respond to the concerns of the community and effectively still keep these cost-effective measures. Looking at our overall program, so as far as do we want to set a higher aesthetic standard, I would say no. I think we are doing an effective job, and that if the community really understood the cost difference of those, they would absolutely support that. From a planning perspective, I would really like to dig into, once we get the new PCI stuff, what portions of our lane miles are in that poor, very poor, and failed. And I understand some of those, like Northwest Sammamish Road, we're not going to repave right now. And so getting a better understanding of which ones are delayed due to future projects versus which we just don't have the funding for would be really important to me. And then I'd also like us to really start talking about the difference between arterials and collectors and neighborhood streets, because if we're really planning out and looking at some failures or some poor roadway conditions on something like an arterial like Gilman, then we're not going to use, as you said, a slurry seal or something like that there. And so really understanding that we have a commitment to both sets of roadways, and the tools that we would use for them are different, and the needs for our particular roadways, once we know the pavement condition index, are going to be different. And so I'd really like, much like we split out pavement management and concrete management, I think there is a different pathway and budgetary need for the arterial and collectors versus the neighborhood streets. And so I would be interested in better understanding that, because the effective cost per lane mile on an arterial is going to be much higher, but there's much more need and much more community awareness of some of those. And so I would be willing to better understand not stretching the dollar on some of those. The city administrator will know that when we tried to do some of the crack seals on Highlands Drive, I complained quite a bit because the sun reflected off of them because there was just too much of it. So I think dealing with and having to understand that overlays are really necessary on some of those larger arterials is important. So that would be my feedback there.
Councilmember Jane?
Yeah. I think to answer the question, obviously, I agree with Councilmember Walsh. I think we should continue to prioritize cost effectiveness. I think the higher aesthetic standard, I think the question for me is basically like, if we went out to voters and said, are you willing to pay $3 million more per year in taxes so that the roads look slightly better and more aesthetic? I don't really think that would pass. And so, you know, then if we want to hold ourselves to that higher aesthetic standard, what else are we going to cut $3 million from? I don't think there's anything that would be worth that trade-off in this community. And I also want to echo some of the points that have been made on, you know, wanting to understand some of the, like, with these roads that are in very poor or failed condition, kind of what's the long-term plan for them, right? Like, I think most of the roads in Issaquah seem to be pretty good, but then the ones that, like, people will notice when they start getting really problematic, and, you know, making sure that we're actually taking care of those, like Gilman or Newport Way, or, you know, north of Sammamish. Obviously, some of them have reasons that they're delayed, but we want to make sure that we're also, you know, accounting for those, budgeting for those, and making sure that, you know, we kind of keep the maintenance up. Because I think a lot of these, you know, bigger projects like full repaving is probably going to fall outside of the scope of the pavement management program. So we just want to, like, understand what that's going to look like.
Councilmember Adair.
Yes, also I'm going to echo the same as someone who actually just did a budget meeting today. Cost effectiveness, obviously, all the way, especially in these times where budget is tight. I did want to add, though, a slight, not wrinkle, but just comment to the higher aesthetic standard. And, okay, it's going to go back to, like, a story, but so I grew up in Texas, and not that Texas is a model for most things, but there was this, in Texas, there was often this, like, pride in their highways type thing. And something that they did, which I don't necessarily think all the highways were great, but they put a lot of effort into the highways right at state lines. In that as you would be driving from, like, New Mexico and come into the state, it'd be bumpy road, and then as soon as you cross the state line, it is smooth and pleasant and just like the best road you've ever been on. But it created this mental sense that the roads here are great, because whenever you did that, you felt it. And arguably, there could be, you know, an effort to certain high visibility roads get a higher aesthetic standard to create that sense that the roads here are better than maybe all of them are. But it is something that I just wanted to note as something that I experienced, that it did, you felt it. You had a certain thought that all the roads here are great because you had that transfer. So it's just something I wanted to bring up as a thought, that you could identify specific ones to maybe get a higher standard than others.
Without actually tearing up Bellevue roads. We'll just make our roads better. Okay, Council President DeMichelle.
Thank you, Mayor Mullet. Let me just go. So I want to echo what Councilmember Walsh said. I'm a big fan of the pavement management program and really pleased with the results of our investment that we made back in 2019. My concern is I would like to look at this request, what appears to be a budget request to me, in the context of the entire budget that we put together for 27 and 28. If we fully fund the pavement management program, what are we giving up? I think that Councilmember Jang also referred to that. I'd like to know what the trade-offs are in terms of the overall budget before I can support committing to fully funding. I have to say that I'm a big fan of the work that was done, I think a year ago on Sunset Way. That is a beautiful job that was done by our city with the new crosswalk near the hatchery, and that street is just beautiful there. So it certainly does make a difference in our community to have beautiful, well-maintained roads. But we have to think, what else are we giving up when we fully fund this program? And so I would like to just hold off and wait till we get into the thick of our budget deliberations before I commit to really supporting the full funding of the program. Thank you.
Oh, that's excellent. And I can speak, I think, administration's perspective. I think we're saying we're not proposing to add like a new department to the city of Issaquah. We're basically proposing what sounds kind of boring, but just investing a lot more money is our next kind of thing that we're going to focus on, of just the mundane, support of our infrastructure. And so I don't think our plan is to cut something to do this. I think, but we are saying we're not necessarily going to be proposing other new programs. We're going to be trying to make this a priority. Councilmember Nichols.
So getting at the core question I think you're asking, at least on the slide, which is prioritize cost effectiveness or aesthetics, it's hard for me to answer which actually does that, in part because of what I was trying to get at when I was picking on the graph. I won't go back to it, but you know the one I'm talking about, that only goes out a year or so. We have a difference in costs that are stated in terms of dollars per square yard. I think to really make this argument well, you would need to add per square yard year or some unit of time in there to understand where these cross over at a point where, if we have, for example, like let's say we're sealing our cracks every year, just as to put something out there. Sure. As a one bookend, but we only have to surface seal every 10 years. If we look at the full lifetime cost of this pavement management plan over 35 years, the more aesthetic one is actually the less expensive in that case, potentially. And I'd like to understand if that's where those are the cases, and making sure that we're not only modeling for a single year and not taking into account longer term costs that could actually be lower.
Okay. I mean, I can definitely do that. I think to clarify that a little bit is we wouldn't crack seal the same road. I mean, the crack seal, the way a road would be treated, if we were going to utilize all the preventive maintenance techniques and reactive, would be potentially you go in and you crack seal when the cracks start showing up. 3 years later, the cracks might be opening up a little bit. They might be longer. We might crack seal it again and just touch up those pieces and buy us another 3 years. And then we'd come in and we'd do a surface seal if it's not an arterial roadway, with patching and then a surface seal. So at that point, we're almost gaining that 15 years of life with 2 $1 treatments and 1 $8 treatment, and then, or a $4.50 treatment. If we were to do that overlay, we're looking at that $35, 35 to 45, and that gets you the 15 years. So if we're able to use both on a consistent basis, we're actually going to be a lot cheaper in the long run by using both preventative and reactive techniques on that same road. So I think I might need to drill down a little bit further with you on exactly what you're getting at with that, but that's where I'm at right now.
I think it's like, eventually every street will get an overlay.
Yeah.
It's just a question of, can you buy yourself an extra 10 or 15 years before you have to pay the full cost? Councilmember Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First off, I want to thank you for this analysis. You've put in time, you've brought in complicated math. I was trying to tell my 15-year-old, 16-year-old to study their math. They said, I'm never going to use math. I'm going to be an engineer. I had to go into a conversation a little bit about that. But you can tell that the amount of math that you put into this analysis, the amount of time you put in to figure out what's going to work best for us is something that the citizens don't see, but should definitely appreciate. In that same regard, the streets, as the mayor points out, are a little bit mundane. You know, the citizens don't think about them. They might see that there's a flower pot on the side of the street and think that's nice, but the underlying function of the street itself, you know, is mundane and something that they just expect. And I just want to compliment you that you're doing a great job meeting that expectation by making sure that our roads are improved in places like Sunset that Council President pointed out, but also maintain that road for the maximum life that you can, using those small fixes along the way, and then using the reactive when it's needed. I would encourage you to continue on the path you're on. The one concern I have about going to a higher aesthetic standard would just be a little bit of an equity potential problem, in the sense that I sat down with a council member up north in Snohomish County, and he was concerned that his streets weren't maintained very well in his poorer district, and his park wasn't maintained very well in his district because it wasn't going to be fixed until 2028, whereas some other areas in town, because of either the squeaky wheel syndrome or just better advocates for their citizens, had newer parks and better streets. So that's just a long way of saying that if we do go to a higher aesthetic standard, that we make sure that the higher standard streets are distributed in a way so that neighborhoods do not feel left out. Neighborhoods do not feel that one area of the city is being treated differently because of X, Y, or Z factors along the way. And we just hope that you keep that into consideration as you're moving forward with the project. Thank you.
Thank you. That is a North Star for the pavement management program in general. You know, there are roadways where we did a surface seal last year, for example, in the Woods neighborhood, and there are still roads in there that need the overlay. So their neighbors might have an overlay and they have a surface seal. Ultimately, I'm just looking at the network as a whole and what needs to be done. And that's definitely, I feel that in my heart, and that's how we proceed in that PMP.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Bennett. I appreciate all your time. And I think we did hear a request for a bus tour somewhere in this whole thing. And okay. Andrea Leonard.
Thank you. Okay, last on the agenda for this evening is a conversation about MetroFlex and the City of Issaquah's microtransit program. As you recall, in the fall, Council wanted us to come back to talk about what are those performance expectations. And so that's why we're back here today. Some of the specific direction needed for this evening is whether City Council has any changes to the goals for an Issaquah microtransit program. And given the goals and the performance data the city collects from Metro, how does the City Council define success for this program? And then finally, we do have some comparisons of other options for you this evening. So which alternative does Council prefer to explore further? We categorize these options really as changes to the existing MetroFlex service to increase ridership, or perhaps a different service option. In terms of background, for those who are not as familiar with MetroFlex, microtransit is technology-enabled, on-demand public transportation service that uses smaller vehicles. That's where the micro comes from. So more flexible vans or shuttles that are able to go into parts of the city that are not built for those big buses. And it provides for more flexible scheduling and routing because it is on demand. MetroFlex is King County's microtransit program that we have been piloting for the past 2 years, and we're now in the 3rd year of operation. Issaquah chose MetroFlex after evaluating a bunch of other options. Those options are reflected in the memo in your packet today. And as I said before, in the fall of 2025, Council had raised concerns about the cost effectiveness of MetroFlex and directed the administration to return to define success and to examine alternatives. And that's why we're here today. So as I said, in 2022, the Transportation Advisory Board and the City Council provided a few program goals for this service. Initially, Council was very focused on connecting Tallis and Squawk to the Valley floor and to the transit center, as those neighborhoods were very underserved by transit. And TAB provided a little extra guidance in terms of a goal, and they wanted to extend the service to all of Issaquah if possible, and not just those 2 neighborhoods. Also, part of the original program goals were to reduce single occupant vehicle trips and greenhouse gases by encouraging shared rides and connecting to transit. This is where the micro-program goals differ a little bit from what you would consider like a typical Uber or Lyft service, where it's usually one person is getting a ride and generating that ride. And so this encourages more shared rides. Also, another goal was to address equity concerns for accessibility of those with low incomes and with limited mobility options. And finally, provide a service that's compatible with existing city resources. So not a service that would require us to hire additional staff or to try to that would be very expensive for the city to provide. And so this is performance data that we collect from Metro on a regular basis. This is data that most of you have seen before in terms of average weekday rides per vehicle hour per van. King County cost per ride is a little over $20, and so is the city of Issaquah cost per ride. Together, that means that the total cost per ride is over $40, and that's the number that City Council was really concerned about with last fall. And so I wanted to break those apart here and really show you how that cost is split. Issaquah pays for the cost of one van and just really the driver for that van, and King County pays for the other infrastructure related to that, and at certain times when demand is high, we get more than one van, and so King County provides for that extra service. The percent of shared trips is 55%. This is where we're trying to measure towards those program goals of shared trips and reducing SOV trips and GHGs. And then percentage of trips in EPA. These are equity priority areas as defined by King County. Unfortunately, we're not able to get specific data from King County on who uses the service, how many have a reduced ride fare permit, et cetera, but they do collect data on trips to or from areas that they determine to be equity priority areas. Those areas are defined by King County with a couple of criteria, including low income and a number of other factors. And then the average wait time is typically about 23 minutes, though of course that changes depending on demand and available vehicles. And so as we shift to what are some other options to MetroFlex, and we looked at a couple of other options. As the administration, we spoke with Uber as well. They're not on this list because we didn't get a proposal back from them in time for this presentation. And so we're just comparing a city-run circulator that's more like a typical shuttle, kind of similar to the Route 200 if you're familiar with that, that the city used to have several years ago. We heard from council that that was something that was interesting they wanted us to explore, so that is an option here. And MetroFlex is kind of that base comparison. And then Circuit. Circuit is a private provider. So MetroFlex is operated through King County by a provider known as VIA. We did talk to them directly as well, but they're not willing to provide services to us outside of the King County contract. Circuit is a competitor of VIA, and they provide services all across the United States, including recently in Bellevue and also in Redmond. They provide services for the bellhop in Bellevue, and they're just getting started in Redmond. And so we talked to each of these, we looked into each of these options to provide some costs, so you can see what the annual cost estimate is. There's a lot in terms of costs that are to be determined, as you see, and that's really because we would need to look more into these options and negotiate a contract and get a lot more details. So this was just kind of first blush, how might these options compare? In terms of goals, we compared the options to the original goals as stated. So as you can see, for most of these options, they fit the goals because microtransit is more and more on this on-demand model. The city-run circulator would not be in as on-demand because it would have a fixed route, so it would only serve a portion of the city, not in the way that Circuit or MetroFlex would just be able to be hailed like an Uber or a Lyft, pretty much to the point of wherever you are in the city. There's a few exceptions with MetroFlex, few parts of the cities that are not served, like Tallis, for example. That was changed with the 2025-2026 contract. I'm sorry, the 2026-2027 contract. Forget what year we're in. Next.
Councilmember Nichols?
So, quick question on the greenhouse gas comparison between the options. Are we sure MetroFlex reduces greenhouse gases? It's a large vehicle that has to go both ways, and most of the time it's single occupancy, right?
Well, 55% of the trips are shared with other passengers, and so
So half the time?
so a little over half the time, versus we compare that to the option of people just driving themselves in their car.
Councilmember Jay.
Just to note, to Councilmember Nichols' point, MetroFlex's own data says the ratio of passenger miles traveled to vehicle miles traveled in all MetroFlex, not just Issaquah. And Issaquah, my understanding is like in the lower performing half. There's 1.5 vehicle miles traveled per passenger miles traveled because they have to drive between the different rides. And especially because the region is so big, you could have someone getting a ride in Issaquah, then the vehicle has to drive to Sammamish. And a lot of these folks maybe aren't folks that have access to a vehicle, so there's that equity aspect, but I don't think the reducing greenhouse gases is, 55% of rides being shared doesn't necessarily mean that greenhouse gases are being reduced.
Well, I think in the Circuit model, it is an EV fleet, so that was one difference between Circuit and MetroFlex.
But I did have an actual question, which was, so I saw on the previous slide the cost of the city-run circulator shuttle was $206,000, whereas when we had looked, the previous version that was from 2022 or whatever said the cost of a city-run circulator shuttle was $400,000 to $800,000. So what changed? Because then the city-run circulator shuttle is very competitive with MetroFlex in terms of cost.
In terms of cost, it is. I was not involved in the cost estimate for the original shuttle. So I did provide a breakdown of that cost estimate in the memo in the packet for this evening, so you can kind of check my math and see what assumptions were used there. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to dig up the assumptions from the previous time that we evaluated those options.
And I would say Circuit said they are indifferent. They're basically you're buying 60 hours a week from us, and if you want to have a fixed route with your 60 hours, you can do a fixed route. They're we're just going to charge you the amount of hours, and we don't care how you use them. It can be point-to-point or fixed. Councilmember Adair?
Yeah, on the city-run circulator shuttle cost estimate, were there actual routes that are considered in that, or I wasn't sure that I saw what the actual route would be.
There was no route. We would need to dig deeper into each of these options if we wanted to pursue them. That's part of the question for council tonight. Is whether we should pursue any of these alternatives and which is the preferred alternative that we should pursue further.
So
So
would
we
that
just did an estimate for number of miles for a circulator around the
Okay.
city, so we would need to, again, refine it. It was just an estimate to try to provide some comparisons for
Okay, so it
tonight's
might
discussion.
have a higher cost if the routes were somehow different or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the assumption, I'm forgetting what exactly the memo said, but I think it was a 7-mile route is what the estimate was based off of.
Deputy President.
Just a sanity check question, and I know we've had this number in the past, I just don't see it here right now. How does a Metro bus or a Sound Transit bus compare if we're saying it's $40.50 per trip to do MetroFlex? How does a bus operating cost compare?
I am not sure. I can ask Metro if they have a cost for their buses.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, like I said, I think in previous years we've had that information. We just don't have it this evening. Thanks.
Councilmember Jang, I can read your mind. I know you want to ask something.
Oh, I was gonna say Metro has this number available, and I believe across all Metro buses, like $10 per ride. I think it's like somewhere in the range of 10 to 15.
And that's the total burden cost?
I believe so, but that includes, I mean, like across all, like the, Bellevue to Seattle buses would be included in that as well.
Got it. Thank you.
Councilmember Nichols.
Okay, sorry, going back a slide to the wait time. How is the wait time for the city-run circulator shuttle calculated?
Oh,
Is it wait time or headway between the shuttles?
for the city-run circulator? I don't have I'm sorry, I don't think I understand. Do you mean for MetroFlex?
Where you put less than 45 minutes, I think.
Yeah, there's a row called
Oh,
City
wait
Run Circulator
times.
Shuttle, and the column is wait times.
Right. Okay, thank you. So that was based off of thinking about it being a fixed route and what the farthest point of that route may be. If we were to have a circulator that's similar to what the Route 200 was, the Route 200 basically hugged along the I-90 corridor up into the Issaquah Highland to serve Swedish, down to the high school, and then along the I-90 corridor from there to make a loop towards Costco. And so looking at that, it will depend on runtime. So I used assumptions with Google directions to try to figure out how long such a route may take at different times. And so that's where that wait time came from.
Okay.
Because you might have just missed the bus. How long might you wait for it to come back around and get you?
So it's probably, just to make sure that we're comparing these fairly though, it's probably the maximum wait time as opposed to the average wait time, which is what the
That's true.
MetroFlex and Circuit
Yes.
are probably would be.
Yes, that's true. Yes.
Councilmember Jang.
So the city run circulator shuttle, the cost would be for one vehicle doing 3,700 hours per year.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And I think this is our last slide, right? I think we're just in the wrap-up
Okay.
slide after this.
Okay, I didn't know if Councilmember Adair had a question. All right, okay. Sometimes it's hard to tell with the mics. All right, so options that we wanted some feedback on tonight. There's one that you didn't see in those charts, which is to continue to work with MetroFlex to try to change some of the service options within the contract. Already, because of council feedback, we have changed the service area for our new contract. So we took out service to the Squawk neighborhood in favor of adding service to the Issaquah Highlands, based on the feedback that we weren't having a lot of ridership for Squawk, the Squawk neighborhood, but we could possibly pick up more riders in the Issaquah Highlands and also reduce the cost per trip if that was the most important success marker to council. There's the possibility of us also looking at the hours for MetroFlex. So we could extend or could change rather the hours to cover more nights for Friday night and Saturday night. That might pick up more riders in that way instead of just looking at the daytime for Saturday, for example. And so we would need to go back to Metro and negotiate this and possibly need some of Sammamish's buy-in since they have we have an overlapping service area with the city of Sammamish. So there's some options within our current services with MetroFlex that we could try out and examine, or we could evaluate another service or vendor as were depicted in the charts we just saw.
Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. During our last conversations about this, we were told that any additional hours, including evenings or weekends, would require an additional van, which would basically double the cost. Are you suggesting there is another option?
I'm suggesting we could investigate shifting the hours. So not increasing the hours, but instead of 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturdays, we could instead perhaps make that window later. So it could be, 11 to 7 or noon to 9 or something like that.
I would say the circuit people, their suggestion was to have Monday through Thursday hours and maybe Friday through Sunday hours. Like Friday through Sunday being you start later and end later, but Monday through Thursday is more daytime. But we don't know, we have to think, or we're trying to get guidance. If that's an avenue we want to pursue, we'd have to find out from Sammamish if they're interested in that since we share cars. Councilmember Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Curiosity question. You mentioned that either Lyft or Uber hadn't gotten a proposal back to you. Do you think that with additional phone calls and pressing from the city, they would be able to get something back to us, or is that just not in the cards?
Not to call out our friends at Uber, but I have reminded them a couple of times, and it's been a couple of weeks, and I haven't heard anything. So I would like to think that if we pressed them enough, we could get something, but so far, my repeated requests have fallen on deaf ears.
Okay, thank you, appreciate that. Would like to have that information if it's available before we look at this again. Thank you.
Are there other questions for Andrea? Oh, Council President DeMichelle.
Yes, thank you. I'm very sorry to keep repeating this, but under options, I would really like to see if we could do a much more aggressive communications around MetroFlex. And I believe the last time that Metro was in front of us when we were discussing the contract, that they said that the contract for this coming year would include Metro's participation in better outreach to our community, and which might include mailings and social media and so forth. I thought we did a really good job when we rolled out MetroFlex a couple of years ago or 3 years ago, but that communications has tapered off. And I think that we need to keep reminding people that this is an option. So I would hope that we would, under options, we would think about a really aggressive communications program around MetroFlex.
Oh, Councilmember Adair. Oh, and then we'll follow up with Deputy President Martz.
To the question of what you do, I'm kind of torn. I'm still kind of, all options seem viable to me. The city-run shuttle seems actually a little bit less in cost. Circuit is interesting, but obviously their number, they have this average cost per passenger of $17 and all this additional usage, but we don't really know where they're getting those numbers from. So I'm curious to know, is that true? Could it, for some reason, using them have all this higher usage? So at the moment, for me, all of these options seem like a viable path, and I can't say I have a direction because all of them depend on so many other variables that we're waiting to find out. What the route would look like on a city-run circulator, what these circuit numbers really mean. So at the moment, I don't have like a direction to go because all three seem potential.
Yeah, I think that's very valid. And I also think because we just changed the MetroFlex service area, it's kind of challenging because we'll have more data, I think at the end of June or earlier. We're going to have more data on what that geographic change did in terms of utilization. But right now, today, like you say, Councilmember Adair, we don't have that information. Deputy President Martz.
I want to gently push back on the idea that there's anything wrong with MetroFlex. So being an engineer, I just like orders of magnitude. King County Metro spends about $2 billion a year for about 90 million rides. That's $22 a ride. And, you know, when you have smaller vehicles and with fewer passengers on them, you're going to be less efficient. So $40 a ride for a you know, on-demand system that has smaller numbers of riders doesn't seem like necessarily a problem to me. So I want to make sure that we're just coming at this from the right perspective, right? I think people have gagged a little on that $40 number, but I don't think, transit is expensive. I come back to, I mentioned Minnesota's wrestler governor earlier in the evening, right? He just said it's all expensive, right? Transportation is expensive. Cars are expensive. Freeways are expensive. Buses are expensive. You just have to do it at some point because it's something that you want to have as a community. And he just said, we're going to do it in Minnesota, and so they did. So I want us to be careful, right? I'm not sure there's anything wrong with MetroFlex at all. And so if it works and we like it, I'm not sure $40 a passenger is a bad marker at all compared to any other transit options that we have out there. Thank you.
I want to be clear, and we're not suggesting, I mean, I think one of our main alternatives is continue to use MetroFlex and just see if we can get better utilization, but yeah.
But I think it was presented, I mean, it has always been presented that it's so much more expensive than anything else, and I don't think that's necessarily
Yeah.
true.
Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. I think similar to Deputy Council President Martz, I am really comfortable with the idea of continuing MetroFlex and providing the service to our community. I've loved seeing the ridership with some of our seniors and students and people that are unable to drive. And so from my perspective, that's the top priority. So I think one of the things you asked was feedback on some of the goals. So I would say I'm not as thrilled with the goals that we originally created around greenhouse gas reduction, single occupancy vehicle. I think those are nice to haves, but the important things for me are equity and usage by people who are unable to drive. I think providing last mile transit to our most dense neighborhoods and connection to the core areas is important to me. Connection to transit is really important. So if we are looking at Circuit, their ability to get somebody to the transit centers and access for those is really important. Wait times is really important for me. And so I think one of my disappointments with the MetroFlex program is if there is only one vehicle, sometimes the wait times for those could be so long that someone just couldn't utilize it, and then that makes their next potential usage of that more of a risky option for them. So that is a more important metric to me. And then the other thing that has been a little bit of a limiting factor on MetroFlex is evenings and weekends. My kids have had several times when they wanted to take it to an event at 5 or 6 o'clock, but then knew they couldn't get back utilizing that. And so that is an important thing for me. I don't think that transit, the ability to have microtransit into Sammamish is important to me. So the idea of a connecting piece, so the fact that we have that with MetroFlex right now is a nice to have, but not something that I would necessarily negate a program such as Circuit against. And so I would say I'm interested in investigating Circuit because I think they have more of an incentive to communicate to our residents and promote the project. And our residents' ability to use it because they have to maintain a certain level of service, whereas King County Metro is like, hey, take it or leave it, this is what we're going to be able to do. So I think they have a potential for getting a higher ridership. I like that we could potentially do later hours, modeled after what the Bellevue program does. And then I also really like potentially their ability to work with corporate sponsorships or other ways that might lower the cost, either to individual users or for our city's costs. And so I like some of those variabilities in there. So I think it's worth our time to investigate those. Maybe it's worth our time to go back to MetroFlex, but I don't think starting later and going into evening hours would satisfy my desires there. I think the morning times are also important. So I just don't know that we can get out of MetroFlex those additional hours that I think would make the program a little bit more effective.
Excellent. And Councilmember Nichols.
So I'm going to start up by saying I agree with Deputy Council President Martz that MetroFlex itself doesn't necessarily seem so expensive to me. I think it's a number that can seem kind of eye-popping when you look at it out of context, but in the context of all transport has inherent expenses to it, whether, as was brought up, that's a highway or another type of bus. So I think we should really be looking at it in that context and not just be optimizing solely for things like dollars per passenger. That seems like a potentially pernicious one for me to optimize based on, because a lot of the premise here is we're trying to connect areas that are transit deserts. They may not necessarily have the highest volume, so I would be concerned about, there's an extreme where, I don't know, we're connecting two ends of the Costco parking lot and they have the highest volume or something, but that's not what we want, right? So just being concerned about what metrics we're actually trying to optimize for. I will disagree a bit on whether we should keep greenhouse gases in there. I think we should keep them in there as a goal. Not keep greenhouse gases in there as a goal, keep reduction of greenhouse gases in there as a goal. And not have it override per se, but let's keep it in part because at the moment, at least with what we have on circuit, I'm skeptical here because it seems like there's a bit of a have your cake and eat it too side to their presentation. It seems possibly less expensive, greener, longer, more, there's a bunch of things that seem great. Is that real? And to that end, I think it would be nice, and I'm not sure if we've gotten a chance yet to see if to speak to our friends in Bellevue, who are already contracting with them and see what their experiences with them has been in a bit more detail. How did their predictions compare to their actuals? Did they get what they thought they were going to get? How have their transit customers felt about that service? I think it's a really interesting option to look at, and based on what it has been presented. But to Councilmember Adair's point, there's not enough information, for me at least, to make any real decision per se on what my preference would be. I think beyond to the point of the question that you're asking, should other options and evaluations be continued? I would say yes, definitely. I think we need more information here.
Yeah, that's helpful, Councilmember Jang. And I will say the Bellevue example is hard to compare apples to apples because it's super utilized, but it's in that downtown Bellevue core. So they love it, but we don't have a very similar core to compare to what they're offering. So they're getting crazy high frequency usage, but we just don't know if that translate into this environment.
I feel I kind of have a pre-existing bias going into this, which is that I just fundamentally disagree with the use of the word microtransit to essentially describe Uber pool. That to me is not transit. And I think one of the things that's really concerning to me in the way that it's currently, the metrics that we currently have is the 23-minute wait time. And the 23-minute wait time is a function of there being rides that then, someone has to complete a ride and then you go to the next ride. And so we're essentially, it seems like the system that we already have is pretty well utilized if the wait time is 23 minutes. If the vans are just sitting around, the wait time would not be 23 minutes. And so I'm very skeptical about this idea that advertising it more and getting more rides will somehow get better utilization, because it seems already pretty well utilized, and that's what we've heard from the folks at Metro as well. There's no economies of scale. If there's another rider, with a normal bus, if you have more riders, then the marginal cost of serving them is basically zero until you have so many riders that then you need to get a bigger bus. But then that's great. You can have more buses, more service. That's better for everyone. I would echo Mayor Mullet's point that Bellevue's circuit, I mean, the service area is tiny. You know, it's like 1 square mile, and so all the rides are like 3 minutes, and the distance between rides is also really short, so then the wait time is a lot less. I think in terms of the access piece, I do think that's something that is important, but also just going back to the cost piece, I don't think we necessarily have to optimize for like getting the absolute lowest rock bottom cost. But when we have a situation where we are paying more for the service per ride than literally just like giving people vouchers for an Uber, I think that's where it makes me think maybe we should reevaluate. And Metro does share data on the transit operating cost per boarding. So the cost that we're paying is not fully loaded because it doesn't include Andrea's time, it doesn't include the staff time of folks at Metro. It's $10.36 per boarding, including DART service, which is like the dial-a-ride transit in rural areas where they can go out of the way to pick you up. So $40 operating cost per ride, I mean, that's kind of high. Being a nerd, you know, I've kind of mapped out what are some of the different ways that we could have different shuttles serving the areas that we think are like highest need. For example, you know, one of the big areas is Rosecrest to Tallis, which, you know, we could question the land use decisions to build subsidized affordable housing in an area that's a transit desert, but it's there. And I think, to me, that's probably one of the areas that should be a very high priority. And, you know, connecting that with the transit center with some other areas like the, you know, Target shopping center, post office, you know, Old Town, even going partway up Squawk, like it's doable. And I think that could also get a lot more ridership. This summer I talked to someone who lives up in Tallis but has no car. And so I talked to her a bit about MetroFlex. I was like, first of all, I was impressed that someone would choose to live car-free in Tallis, which is a transit desert. But she said she uses MetroFlex sometimes, but it's not that great because it's completely unpredictable. Like you don't know when it's going to come until you order the thing, so you can't plan around it. Versus, you know, even if the headway is 45 minutes, at least you know. And I think if we're going to do this shuttle, I would hope that Circuit has some really good, you know, way to track where their vehicles are. So just because the wait time or headways isn't as much of an issue as predictability. And I think fundamentally with MetroFlex, because it just goes wherever people call it, there's just never going to be any predictability unless you get so many vehicles that then, you know, you can just have them all on demand, which is then also going to be just prohibitively expensive. So my strong preference is to explore this circulator shuttle option in more detail. I think some of the other options is basically like, you know, with the like microtransit service, it's just like what are the different costs and things like that in service areas. I think with circulator shuttles, there's so many different options of like where you could have the route go that we should start looking into what those could be, whether some of them could be more like a DART type thing where you can go a little bit out of the way to help kind of serve some of that, you know, like if someone's like a little bit out of the way of where it goes, could we be able to provide that service as well? But just fundamentally, I think if you can have a route that's like somewhat more predictable, then you know, if you can have 4 people that are all going in the same direction at the same time, then the cost per rider is going to, it's just, we can get so much more mobility for people in our community for the same cost.
Excellent. I think that that's our last slide, right, Andrea?
Yes, for the MetroFlex or microtransit item. So overall, for all of the items we discussed tonight, just some next steps to wrap us up for the evening. Work with Sound Transit and regionally to save Issaquah Light Rail. That's where a lot of our focus is going to be over the next 6 months, as Mayor Mullet said earlier this evening. Also in our next steps, that we have our Transportation Improvement Program update. So that will return to council in June. First stop, though, is going to be with the Transportation Advisory Board and also with the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee. So those meetings are forthcoming. And as Mayor Mullet said, we're looking for a focus on congestion relief. We've also heard a lot of feedback tonight for bike and ped and safety improvements as well, so we'll be looking into those and using the bonding capacity of our Transportation Benefit District funds. Also, look at ongoing implementation of capital and maintenance plans, and we just got a lot of feedback for you for more work needed on MetroFlex and microtransit in the city. So we'll have to return for more discussion of that later this year.
Are there any other questions before we wrap up and adjourn? I mean, I think that going back, I think to Council President DeMichelle's concern, which I heard, which is I'm worried about committing these investments, not knowing what it's could be taking away. And I think the goal in this process is normally budgets grow. Like when Deputy President Martz and I were on this council together, it was a $34 million budget. Now it's a $68 million budget. We know budgets grow. We also know that we pay our staff cost of living adjustments. So you don't have that much extra money, but I think the goal here is whatever extra money we do have, we want the priority to be maintaining our infrastructure, specifically this pavement management program, knowing that Taliesin Islands are coming up at points in their life where we think if we don't start making some investments, they could fall behind the curves. We don't want them to fall behind. And that's kind of a fundamental principle I think we're laying out here tonight in combination with making an aggressive push on light rail regionally. And everyone in this room can help with that push. And I think we've heard loud and clear that we can't make, at this time, it's very clear that we need to get more information on terms of, what we're doing with the transit space and the options to this community. And so we will continue to get that information and come back with more numbers. And yes, we can bug Uber for more information. I think we can also look at what fixed route things and compare and whether we have options to change MetroFlex hours without driving up costs. And so these are all things we will continue to get and bring back to the council. But with that, this special meeting on transportation is officially adjourned at 8:51.